Hi there, this is Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. My name is Ian Willoughby. My guest this time is Michael Tate, founder of Jantar Publishing. It's a UK-based firm that issues works in translation, frequently from Czechia. Among the small publishing house's best-selling titles are a handsome edition of the classic Kytice by Karel Jaromír Erben, and more recently Winterberg's Last Journey by Jaroslav Rudiš. I spoke to Mike Tate about Jantar's development since he founded it in 2011, but also about his own Czech roots and years here in Prague. That's for this edition of Prague Talk. My first question, Mike, your mother's parents were Czech, is that right?
Czechoslovak would be the thing. Yeah, my grandmother was born a few years before the First World War in Moravia, and it's a fairly classic kind of Czech rural upbringing. So the village, of course, was called Lhotka, and it's a couple of miles north of Zlín, and it's, 20, 30 houses all around a central kind of bit of grass with a tiny little chapel in the middle. She was one of 8 or 9. And her brothers and sisters either stayed exactly where they were born or left. One went to Australia, and others in Canada. My grandmother came to Britain.
What led her to Britain?
Mr. Hitler. So my grandfather was a Bata person, and he was a senior member of the management team of Bata in Holland. He was doing some sort of early research work in the UK to find sites for Bata to develop. Hitler ordered the annexation of the Sudetenland. My grandfather phoned my grandmother, who I'm pretty sure had recently given birth to my oldest aunt, and said something along the lines of pack up, Ludmila, and what you can carry and get on a train. So that's what led her to Britain.
Was your grandfather involved then in the setting up of the Batia estate in East Tilbury in Essex?
Yes, but tangentially, when that was being set up from the early 30s, he had more than enough to do in Hilversum in the Netherlands. But he was brought in for various meetings, I'm told. I mean, there's no documentation of this. And when he left Hilversum and came to the UK, he was involved in first kind of like managing the development of what was already there at East Tilbury, but also going out into other parts of the UK to look at new sites. So for example, when my mother was born, she was born in 1940 in Cambridge. That's where the little family was. And she also, I discovered recently, she spent 8 months of her baby life in a place called Crosby on what is now the West Cumbrian coast. And again, they kind of eventually found their way to East Tilbury in 1940 or 1941 as mum, dad, and 2 girls.
This is something I've never really thought about before, but were the staff in East Tilbury mainly Czech, or were they British local people?
Well, a combination of both. And again, this is from kind of family anecdotes. During the Second World War, there were a lot of expat Batia staff. I think passing through might be the best way of putting it. So they would arrive and then they would stay and do things or go elsewhere. And going elsewhere was certainly what my grandfather expected to do. But I've got some really interesting documents of his, like entry visas into Brazil in 1941 and Argentina in 1942. Like no one knows whether he actually went. But the logistics of that are quite mind-boggling if he did. I've no idea how he would have done that. But anyway, to answer your question, there were a lot of Czechs there. but also local people, but also people from other parts of Europe that were Bata or Batia employees. It was a very, I think, like a lot of England that hasn't been documented very well. A lot of England in those days had a lot of non-British people around for various reasons. And East Tilbury was no exception, absolutely not. But I do have a really fond, mad memory of walking around East Tilbury with my grandmother in the 1970s. And, all her friends from the 1940s were, they were retired and old, and, they would chat away in Moravian dialect for what seemed hours on end to me as an 8-year-old or whatever. It wasn't until much later in my life that I realised that old people spoke English as well. So the only old people I encountered were basically speaking Czech. I just thought that was a special language for old people.
And did you speak Czech yourself, or understand anyway?
I understood words like sakra. That was deployed quite a lot by my grandmother, and occasionally prosim. But no, I mean, I was quite a boisterous child. I was much more interested in ruining my grandmother's garden by weeding, or going off to play with people on the estate when we visited, or riding bikes or whatever. I was never really around.
And tell me, Mike, when and why did you move to Prague?
I moved to Prague in March 1993. I first arrived in September 92, and at that time I was working for a British HR consulting firm, and we were invited to come and pitch for work for a very large multinational, and we pitched up and stayed. We couldn't get a hotel. There was some big conference. Anyway, we basically stayed just by Jiří Hospodě in one of those apartment buildings. We got the gig. I was the only one available to kind of deliver it. So from then, I was traveling backwards and forth. I mean, I would stay in Prague for 2 weeks and go back to the UK for another 2. And then we got more work, and I moved over permanently. All my suits and ties moved to Prague in March or April 1993, and I stayed there like that till April 1999. My first apartment was in Vršovice. Then we moved to another place briefly, and then we moved to a village called Zvolle when our first child was born.
It sounds like you had a rather different experience than many of the young wasters like me of 1990s Prague, in that you had to get up in the morning and go to work and be a responsible kind of business person.
Yes, that was pretty much me kind of Monday to Friday, but I mean, I was on my own. Saturdays and Sundays, particularly Sundays. Saturdays were spent kind of like asleep, really. But Sundays, I would go just wandering. I would just leave the apartment and go wandering around Vršovice quite closely. It has changed a lot since those days. And making my way into bits of Vinohrady and Žižkov, and obviously the centre. But yeah, Monday to Friday was very definitely suit and tie and that kind of gig.
You told me you got married at St. Joseph's, I guess, church in Malstrana, and that you were the first couple married there since the 30s. How did you get to do that?
This is a very long story, but the brief version is my wife's British, Irish heritage, but born in the UK. She went to Sunday services in English at that church and got to know the priest. We were going to get married in London, but for various reasons decided to get married in Prague. And the priest, Josef Pazderka, got himself licensed to perform wedding ceremonies. Worked a lot with Maria to get the service together, and we didn't know until we signed the register. There's basically a gap from 1938, and then there's our names, and it's like, okay. So yeah, I mean, basically, it was closed down in the olden days. So and it was basically Father Yosef that made it work. And we were, yeah, it was a gorgeous day, absolutely fantastic day.
When did you first get into Czech literature?
When I was in Prague, so yeah, I was a kind of like 9 to 5 kind of business guy, but I wanted to learn the language, and for some strange reason decided to read books by Milan Kundera and others in translation. When I started trying to do that in Czech, that was a bit of a revelation, and that was rather hard. So I learnt a lot of grammar and vocab reading newspapers, starting off with Hospodářské noviny, which, my God, that was back in the day. Yeah, the sentence could last 2 or 3 paragraphs. But yeah, things like Mladá Fronta was a lot easier to digest. So that kind of gave me the grounding. But it wasn't really till I returned to the UK. I had a chip on my shoulder that I didn't have a degree. I started one, but kind of didn't complete in the 80s. And one day I just decided, right, I'm going to do something about this. And I phoned up the School of Slavonic and East European Studies and said, like, my name's Mike Tate. I've got science A-levels, but I speak a bit of Czech. I'd like to study Czech. Am I just wasting my time or something? I mean, it was like a really, and the lady at the other end of the phone was quite calm and invited me into an open day. And it was once I started studying at CEAS that I got into Czech literature. I went there with the intention of studying history and learning Czech as a language rather than the literature. But I kind of got sucked into it while I was there. And yeah, I mean, it was such a privilege. I mean, I was taught by Robert Pinsent. That was, yeah, you just can't describe that in any other way as a privilege. Also, I got to know David Short rather well. We spent a lot of time together. And also, you got to bear in mind, I was most of the time, it was just me in those lessons. So there was no hiding. And yeah, I really treasure those memories. I really treasure that time.
And what led you then to, I guess a few years later, to start up Jantar Publishing?
It was entirely as a way to thank David Short for his patience. In my final year, he gave me a dual language text called Angelička or The Angel Maker. In his view, it solved all the major grammatical and syntactical challenges translating English into Czech. And I just thought it was an amazing text. It was really, really, really compelling. And I'd met one of his former students who ran a book distribution company, and together we produced a small book as a gift. It was like I was going to give it to him. He had to know, of course, and one thing led to another, and we ended up starting a company and finding another text, which was Prague, I See a City by Daniela Hodrova. And then we started getting into copyright and translated. I mean, it was the idea at the beginning. It was just going to be a gift, and then it was fairly clear that there was an interest, beyond the CEAS population in our books, and we kind of just carried on. There have been several bumps in the road, to say the least, but it started off as a gift.
Well, I think the whole venture is a gift to Czech literature, especially when I know that you have a kind of demanding day job. Where do you find the energy and the motivation to keep running this publishing company, which must take quite a bit of your time?
It does take quite a bit of time. The short answer is I really don't know, Ian. I mean, I am very passionate about it, which helps, but it's a really interesting thing to do. I'm constantly engaged in conversations with really, really bright, engaged human beings, whether they're authors, translators, agents, reviewers, whatever. It's constant, and it's really become part of my life. So Yeah, it's not a question of finding the energy. The energy's there. It does get exhausting sometimes, but I just stop and have a sleep. That's kind of that's the secret of the success, I suppose.
What have been some of your biggest sellers? I'm presuming that the Rudiš book, Winterberg's Last Journey, which came out last year, must have sold relatively a lot.
Yeah, that was a bit of an experiment, but you're absolutely right. We sold out the first print run within 4 months, but it also opened up other things or other interesting opportunities. So it was really easy to find bookshops that wanted to stock it. It was really easy to find reviewers who wanted to review it. And, this might be the wrong thing to say here, but I think it's entirely because it was translated from German, which is, one of the expected languages that literary translations appear from. And we got a review in the Spectator magazine, for goodness sakes. I mean, it was, and a really, really positive one. It appeared in the Irish Times, it appeared in the London magazine, it appeared in the TLS, it appeared on some fairly big blogs. And yep, so that actually isn't our biggest seller though. I think at the moment that would be number 3 in total, though I didn't prepare for this question. So, but easily Kytice is our biggest seller. It just continues to confound me. That was the 3rd book we ever published, and that got a review in the TLS. I had nothing to do with that. It just appeared. And then Helen Oyeyemi described it as, in very glowing terms, in a Q&A for the New York Times. And there was this like really weird few weeks where I was getting emails with screenshots of the best-selling poetry books on Amazon.com. And it was, like 41, 43, whatever, just whatever day the screenshot was taken. And people were asking me, they were saying, congratulations, how did this happen? And I just didn't know. I hadn't a clue. It was several weeks later that I found out about that interview.
And typically, how do you choose what to publish? Is it just a matter of taste, or are you calculating what could be a reasonably decent seller?
Yeah. So certainly at the beginning, well, it's fair to say that the company's evolved quite a lot. So though Czech language source books are a significant part of our catalogue, they're by no means all of them. At the beginning, it was very definitely what we could find, and very definitely personal taste. These days, though, it's really, this is a commercial organization now. It's not just me. The books have to sell. It just can't be a hobby. They've got to sell. I really want to make Jantar into something that's bigger, and that has a lot to do with text selected, but also getting the financing right, getting the people together to look after the commercial side of it. The easy bit is choosing the text to translate and publish. The really hard bit is getting reviewers to review them, getting them in bookshops, getting them on websites to sell, managing our own website, keeping the books in print, and so on and so on. Yeah, it's very much a commercial thing now.
Where would you like Jantar to be in, let's say, 10 years from today?
Actually, there has been a lot of discussion about this in recent months. There are a few private investors who want to invest in the company, and I've encouraged that a lot. Also, it is actually it's a very engaging business model. Books in translation have a couple of key things in their favor right now. The first one is that the sales growth of those books are increasing every year, or increases every year. And the second bit is the demographic is very interesting. People who read books in translation are in their 20s, 30s, and early 40s. But also the percentage of male readers is significantly higher than, at a quote unquote, a normal work of fiction. So stats for male readers for books in translation, it's 30% of the readers, 38% of the readers are male, against something like 12% for a regular bit of fiction. This is in English in the UK, in the US. So that actually makes it quite a compelling proposition. There's also some very good benchmark publishers in the UK, so Fitzcarraldo and Pushkin, who have been around for less time than Jantar, but they're getting books onto Booker, long lists, short lists, and even winning. They've expanded quite dramatically. They're making millions of pounds. I mean, Fitzcarraldo, I'm sitting in the southern end of Lewisham. Fitzcarraldo is about a mile and a half away. They've got a chunky staff and pumping out 20, 30 titles a year. That's where I would like Jantar to be in 10 years.
And can you imagine giving up the day job and only being a publisher?
I can certainly imagine that, but I think it's better to call it a dream, Ian. It's better to call it a dream.
Many thanks indeed to Michael Tate for speaking to me in June 2025 for this edition of Prague Talk, a podcast from Radio Prague International. If you're new to the pod and enjoyed my chat with Mike, why not check out some of the earlier conversations in the series and subscribe wherever you get podcasts. But for now, from me, Ian Willoughby, thank you so much indeed for listening to Prague Talk, and talk to you again very soon.